Welcome to the Character Sheet, comic books home for everything fantasy and tabletop news. And today we have a very special treat. We are talking to the Mistborn team from the amazing Cosmere RPG from Brotherwise Games. We've got Ross, Merrick, and Andrew here to talk to us more about the surprise world guide that sort of got announced right as the campaign launched. So I guess, guys, first things first, thank you for being here. And why don't you give the people that might not be super familiar with the Mistborn side of Sanderson's work just kind of a brief overview of the world of Mistborn as it appears in the Cosmere RPG.
Oh, I think that's probably a good one for maybe Ross. Ross, you know a lot about the Cosmere. I feel like you're probably most qualified.
So the way I like to describe the Mistborn to people is that it's kind of like this punk noir heist story that's all about heisting an empire for all intents and purposes. It's basically there's this 1,000-year-long ruler, basically an immortal guy who has shaped the entire continent to his whims and his political presence. And basically the entire thing is about trying to take him down. At least that's the first book. And then it kind of spirals out into the consequences of the things that happen in the first book, which I won't spoil for anyone, but there's always another secret. It is a world shrouded in mists and ash. There's very little vegetation and plant life. There's a lot of class disparity. So it's a very interesting setting to run a game in, read the books of.
Well, awesome. Go ahead.
And there's I was going to say, that's the first era. But the other interesting thing about this world is that Brandon has now written 2 different series set on Scadrial, the kind of Mistborn setting. And so there's a whole second era that takes place quite a few years after the first series and gets a little bit more into like Wild West vibes or like kind of like, I guess, Industrial Revolution vibes. What would you call
it? Also?
It definitely gets to a little bit more of like 1920s, almost interwar kind of flapper stuff as like well. If you're in the urban, if you're in the urban areas,
and so we explore both eras in the RPG, so this RPG takes place on Scadrial in either era that you want it to take place in, and is one part of our broader Cosmere RPG.
Well, that's awesome. That answered literally one of my questions, and that was going to be which era will the game take place in? It looks like fans of both eras will be able to play in their era of choice.
Both.
Yeah.
Why not both?
Yeah. Fantastic.
It's a little it's kind of an interesting problem too, because you could theoretically do a whole separate book on each era, right? But there is a lot of overlap. One part of the setting we didn't touch much on is kind of the magic system. But the magic system on Scadrial focuses on people swallowing these metals and then burning these metals. And the different metals give them different abilities, and different people have access to these different powers. And all of these powers are the same between both eras. Some haven't been discovered yet in the first era, but it is kind of the same magic system. So there's a lot of overlap. And so one thing we really tried to do with this is we're trying to kind of serve both eras with a single book. And so we are kind of codifying the content of the Mistborn RPG such that you can kind of quickly and easily flip through the book and see what things belong in what era, because a lot of it can belong in both.
One of the things that really hooked me as an initial reader of Mistborn was like the foreword by Brandon talking about how he had this plan of moving that magic system forward in the eras. And so, we've seen the first 2 eras now. All of those books are published, but we have future stuff that's going to be coming. And I think that's one of the hugest hooks for Mistborn.
Yeah, I think Brandon said he's working on Era 3 like next.
Yeah.
He said that at last Dragonsteel Con, he outlined like a kind of his writing plan going forward. And I think Era 3 Mistborn is coming up soon, so that's exciting.
It should also be noted that Era 2 and Era 1 are about, 300 years apart? So technology has advanced in very meaningful ways. And since both Allomancy and Feruchemy, like the 2 kind of most common magic systems on Scadrial, are kind of genetic in the way that they are passed down. There's some very interesting things that happen as a result of it being 300 years later that would not have been possible because of the Lord Ruler's oppression in Era 1.
Well, that's a perfect jumping off point to one of the big things we wanted to talk about, and that is, the magic system. Mistborn is probably best known for its very deep and incredible magic system. So how does allomancy and feruchemistry, how do the metallic arts work in the Mistborn setting in the Cosmere RPG?
So in the Cosmere RPG as a whole, there's some threads that one very important element of this game is that this system spans all of the various worlds in the Cosmere, and that it be as simple and intuitive as possible for people to take characters from these different worlds and play them together one day. So our character sheet and the basic system has some fundamentals that kind of are true across every setting. So our characters, they not only have their stats, and then they've got their health. They've got this resource called focus that represents their kind of mental acuity. But then finally, they have a resource called investiture. And readers of the Cosmere will know this is basically magic in the setting. And so every character has access to investiture. In our first game set on Roshar, the investiture stat is used for drawing in Stormlight and using Stormlight. And then on Scadrial for Mistborn, the investiture stat is used to represent how much of those metals you might have a reserve of in yourself. And as you drink metal vials that give you more metal, you'll be able to kind of refill and use this investiture stat to use these various powers. That's at least for allomancy. There are a couple other magic systems. To your point about being deep, there's kind of 3 magic systems. I guess it depends on how you count them. You could argue there's even more, but there's 3 main magic systems. The other big one being Feruchemy. Ross, do you want to talk a bit about that?
Absolutely. So Feruchemy, so allomancy, just to jump back to that a little bit, is each metal produces a very specific power. And as of Era 1, there's, I think, 10 known metals. There's more than that. I don't want to give too many spoilers. People haven't read it yet. But when you burn that metal that you've ingested into your stomach, it produces a very specific ability. Like steel gives the ability to see sources of metal and then magically push on them. If they're less weighty than you, they get pushed away. If they're more weighty than you, you get pushed away. So that's all, but then how people use it is very creative in the books, which I think is part of what makes Mistborn so compelling. Feruchemy is very different. Feruchemy uses those same metals, but instead of eating them, typically they're worn as jewelry, armbands, earrings, necklaces, rings. And depending on the type of metal, you can store a particular trait of yourself in them. Probably one of the most iconic, because of Era 2, is iron, which allows you to store your own weight. So make yourself lighter by storing, or you can tap it later to vastly increase your weight. And you can tap incredibly, incredibly quickly to increase your weight exponentially for a very short period of time. And so this one actually in our game doesn't even interact with the investiture score. It uses a separate system called charges, which are not too dissimilar from how Fabrials work on Stormlight. So we're trying to draw those interparallels between very different magic systems so that you kind of already are primed, if you're using the books together, to use things in similar ways.
Cool. Well, that leads into another question, which is, speaking of those two systems, are the Mistborn and Stormlight systems compatible in any way? Can my characters sort of world hop between the two if I have a creative enough story hook to make that happen?
Oh yeah, big time. One of the most important things about the Cosmere RPG is that it is the Cosmere RPG, and that all of these books work together. I think probably the closest, but each of them also can stand alone for people who just want to play on that planet. Probably the closest analogy for a product line structure that we have for this is something like Fantasy Flight Games' Star Wars line. They did a similar thing where you've got different core books that have you play in different parts of the Star Wars setting, but they all just can be seamlessly used together. And so that's kind of a similar thing here, where each book can just be used as a standalone rule book. If you just want to play on that setting, you don't need to buy other books. But they should be completely compatible with each other as well. And so that's been one really important thing to us, is that, you know, there's some games that can be like technically compatible, but you've got to do a lot of work to make them mesh. But we want these to be as intuitively compatible as possible, where it just works to have your character from Stormlight, and the GM doesn't have to do any other heavy lifting, and, you know, just needs to read your powers and kind of catch up on how your surges might work, and then integrate you into a game with people from other settings and other planets. There's obviously a bit of lifting on just knowing the Cosmere and knowing all the different settings, you know, and our world guides do help with that to try to help catch you up. But, you know, there's always that challenge.
Yeah, the world guides, they're definitely written with the idea in mind that you're probably familiar with the setting, but we understand that maybe you haven't read the books in a couple of years. So we want to have that information like readily available so that you can reference it and you don't have to go back through your entire collection to be like, wait, what did Kelsier say halfway through the book? I feel like that was mentioned. And give sort of that broader overview when you're running or playing the game.
Oh, fantastic. And that's, I guess, speaking of that, of the setting, do you guys have is there like a particular class or path that you're really excited about people seeing in the new Mistborn World Guide? Is there one that, I know we've talked about, you know, the Allamanters, and we're going to have like Feruchemists, but is there one in there in particular you'd like to shine a spotlight on, or a personal favorite for you guys?
I would love to talk a little bit about this.
Oh.
Yeah, I was going to say, Ross wrote a lot of the Allomancy and Feruchemy powers alongside Ruvaid, so I bet you have some thoughts.
So yeah, I really love a lot of the metallic arts. My biggest obsession, I think one of the reasons I was brought onto the team, is that I am obsessed with the Cosmere's magic systems, aka the invested arts. So I've done a lot of work on them. I did Surges in Stormlight as well, and Radiance. But I think the one metallic art I'm probably the most excited for people to see is Gold Allomancy. It is described as useless in the books, but Ruvaid came in with a large theory of how they might be able to work, and it seems like Dragonsteel might be on board with that use, and hopefully it survives their review, because it's very exciting to me. When it comes to the heroic paths, though, Max Brook and Lydia Swen have been doing some incredible work on the Mistborn specialties for our 6 heroic paths. 2 of my favorites are the Rebel, which is it very much is all about inciting rebellion and working through adversity, and does a lot of cool stuff with that. But also, I'm a huge fan of the Brawler. I've always loved in-your-face melee builds, and a character I've brought to playtests to try it a number of times is the Pewter Arm Brawler, and I just love the way that those two work together. But like just getting in people's faces, making it harder for people to do ranged attacks, grappling, punching people to death. It's all great fun.
I was on the heroic paths. Obviously, there's a lot of exciting metallic arts in the book, but on the heroic paths, I think there's some pretty cool stuff. One of the ones Lydia wrote is called the Mastermind, and this is kind of the person who's doing a lot of the planning. It's central to a lot of the Mistborn stories, you know, are kind of like they're, you know, these kind of heists and crews kind of coordinating these different things, whether it be outside the law in the first series or sometimes within the law in the second. There's always kind of these crews and plans constantly going on. And so one of the archetypes we knew we wanted was this kind of mastermind, you know, whether that be Doxin coordinating, Kelsier, you know, being this kind of master planner. And the mastermind is super cool. It's one of the trees
Steris,
of
justice for Steris.
Yes, Steris.
Always Steris.
I think it's crap. Is it in leader or is it in scholar? Now I don't remember.
Leader, I believe, is where mastermind is.
Yeah. Okay.
Scholar got inventor.
So it's one of the 3 sections of our leader heroic path, and it lets you. It kind of leans into the very narrative side of the Cosmere RPG and our plot die, and that kind of more empowering the players And so the mastermind can kind of come up with these master plans that are slowly unfolding throughout a scene and that they can slowly progress and then come to fruition. And so it really empowers the players to take on kind of narrative agency as they kind of enact these plans alongside and work with the GM to enact these plans. And I think it's been coming together in a very cool way as like a solid character identity. I think people will be very excited about outside of the invested systems.
How about you, Merrick? Any paths you're particularly excited about?
Very similar to yours, actually, Ross. In one of our playtests, I had so much fun with a pewter arm brawler. I built him like somebody who would run in and isolate a target, so like punch really hard, but then move them and then pummel them before coming back in. It was a fun, interesting build. Another one I love is combining the hunter sharpshooter in Era 2. Well, I mean, usable in Era 1 as well, but like in Era 2 with rifles,
guns,
and yeah, and then going with a lurcher misting because I could pull myself up into vantage points and create my own sniper nests, which was very interesting. And then, as you pointed out, Rebel, I want to try it. I haven't played it yet, so that's my next one I'm very excited for.
Well, I have some bad news for you guys about the Pure Arm Brawler after last night's playtest, because that thing is getting nerfed.
Oh,
that's fair. That's very fair.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you hate to see it.
The synergy was too good.
It was
very
it was broken.
That's why we test.
Yeah, that's why we test, so we catch the builds that consistently do 80 damage per turn.
Well, actually, that's a great question for you guys. Are you, as we've got, at this point, quite a while until launch sometime in 2025, are you going to do entirely internal playtesting, or are you thinking about doing external playtesting for little bits and pieces?
That's a good question. I don't know if we can answer that. That's probably more on Brotherwise sides. Johnny or somebody will probably make that call about whether or not we do an open beta for Mistborn specifically. So unfortunately, I don't think we can probably say yes or no. We did do an open beta of a good amount of the Stormlight material, something you can still check out for people who are curious about the system. But
yeah, free on
we'll have to kind of wait.
And on Demiplane.
Yep, yeah. And we'll have to wait and see on Mistborn on exactly kind of what our plan is. So I can tell you we're definitely doing some external testing, a closed alpha that we're starting momentarily.
That's awesome. Well, then I guess one more big question is, set in the Mistborn setting, it's one of the most popular fantasy settings of like the last 20 years. Are there going to be any like little fun Easter eggs or references from the novels worked into the World Guide or the Mistborn Legacy Adventure when those come along? Do you have any hints of that?
No Easter eggs at all. We're not doing anything. Nothing fun.
Yes, no secrets in the series that has the tagline, "There's always another secret." None at all.
Can you think of any examples, Merrick, from the World Guide?
Yeah, absolutely. So recently I was doing a bunch of work on Elendel for Era 2 in Mistborn, and in sort of our points of interest and locations, we've got a lot of things from the city that you're expecting to see, and a couple of things that are mentioned and are sort of like built out as areas that you can adventure in. One of the ones that I'm really excited for is a mansion in one of the more affluent areas of the city where you could meet and potentially work for some very heavy-hitting characters that have been mentioned across the Cosmere. Without spoilers for people who maybe haven't read all the way through Mistborn, can't say too much more, but it's pretty cool. And then other areas around, like if you go back to Era 1 and you are, say, for example, setting an adventure in the Terrace Dominance, some of the keepers that are mentioned show up in adventure hooks or background. And like all of the major named characters and many of the minor named characters will all have their own like entries for GMs to like see their information and figure out how to use them in their own campaigns.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Even in the handbook,
Yeah.
we have Easter eggs. In terms of like, there is a particular talent in one of the heroic trees that I believe is currently called Jack of Many Hats. That very directly references the proclivities of a particular main character in Era 2 to put on hats and then embody different personalities based on who they believe that hat would have belonged to.
Was there an internal debate between Jack of Many Hats or Hats of All Trade?
We'll see what names make it to the final book. We always talk about like talent names are one of those funny things where you want it to be explanatory but also referential and like maybe a little punny but not too punny. You know, it's we always talk over a lot of those. I think another cool place for Easter eggs too has been the items chapter. There's a lot of little things people do in the books or little items that come in handy. And as you're building out, you know, what little things could people go shopping for or end up wanting, you can like really pull on cool examples from the books to get some of those trinkets, you know, to kind of fill out that list, make it feel very thematic to Scadrial. So I think people will find some items in there as fun nods to scenes from the books.
Your dueling canes, your Kolos blades, your aluminum-lined hats that definitely have no correlation to real-world conspiracy theories.
Well, that sounds like I've said it multiple times, but it's still true. This all sounds amazing. I cannot wait to get my hands on this. If viewers at home cannot wait to get your hands on this, you have until October 4th to late pledge and join the, as of last check, over 55,000 backers of this project, getting your hands on one of these Cosmere RPG books as soon as possible. But guys, I cannot thank you enough for your time. I and the viewers, I'm sure, are incredibly excited to see Mistborn get more information, just see it, the progress go along. Before we leave, is there anything I've left out that you would like to mention about Mistborn here?
I mean, if you want a Mistborn fix before these handbooks come out, Brotherwise does have a deck building game coming out very soon. I can't remember the exact date, but I think it's October 4th. It's like coming very soon. I got a chance to play it a little bit at Gen Con. It is awesome.
Yeah, it's a clever little deck builder, and it's got a lot of fantastic art. The art team has just been phenomenal, and a lot of the same artists that worked on the card game will be working on stuff for the RPG as well. You know, I mean, I love me a card game, but in the RPGs you get the art so much bigger on that in the book spreads. So, but you should definitely check that out. I mean, we could, as far as stuff from the book to talk, things from Mistborn to talk about, we could probably go on for quite some time. But I think one question we get a lot, we've gotten a lot during the campaign is just like, you know, what stuff is in there? You know, like is X or Y going to be covered? And, you know, we mentioned that Allomancy is going to be covered. We mentioned that Feruchemy is going to be covered. But I can tell you that we are also going to have some stuff for Hemalurgy, which is the kind of darker metallic art. You're going to be able to play as Khandra, as Kolos-blooded characters. So we're really, you know, we are not trying to hold anything back. We really want to explore these eras as deeply as we can. So for anyone curious, we're trying to kind of cover all of our bases on as far as what content we can provide for you in these books. It's one cool thing about like the Cosmere RPG is there's so many different worlds to go to that it's not like we're holding back here. We're trying to make each book as thorough an exploration of the world as you can, because, you know, like once you've had your fill of Scadrial, you can go on to Roshar or onto Cell or onto any of the worlds in the World Hopper book. So we have plenty of. Brandon has left us with a lot of content to explore and do rules for here.
And what's also great is Dragonsteel, including Brandon, have been very open about their intent for this to be a living RPG. So as Brandon continues writing books, creating new worlds, or further exploring existing worlds, we're going to get the opportunity to explore those in gameplay as well.
Yeah, and jumping back to Fisher's point about playing as Khandra or Kolos Blooded, I think that one of the most exciting things for me as a fan of the series is how we have that sort of access to Dragonsteel to ask them, what does day-to-day life as a Khandra look like? And how can we give options to players to explore that and to represent characters in a very interesting individual way within these cultures that are not really explored in the books so far. So digging into the Khandra, the Kolos Blooded, their communities, and all those sorts of things are something I find really, really exciting.
Well, that's an excellent place for us to leave off on. Thanks again to, of course, Ross, Andrew, and Merrick from the amazing Brotherwise team and the Cosmere RPG. Like I said, if you are still interested and you have, for some reason, not backed it, you still have plenty of time. Go over to Kickstarter. Late pledges open until October 4th. And do all the normal YouTube stuff, the liking and the subscribing. And until next time, guys, thank you so much for being here. And to everyone at home, we'll have a new video tomorrow. And stay safe, everybody.